Good evening, everybody. Um, Williamsburg Regional Library and William and Mary conceived the One Book, One Community series as an opportunity for readers to get together and have a shared reading experience, including programs like this to highlight different aspects of the group and bring more people into a deeper conversation about it. As you know, this year we chose Stamped by Jason Reynolds. Stamped and its source book, Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi, I think are timely reminders of things that we need to remember, such as the indisputable fact that race and racism are a foundation of our society. We had a presenter, Bill Sizemore, last night, who said that white people have a self-induced amnesia about the past. I would extend that to say that white people have self-induced blindness about the present. Hopefully, libraries and universities like William and Mary and Williamsburg Regional Library can help to start these conversations, and they're going to be difficult, they're going to be bitter, but we need to get rid of those twin illnesses of amnesia and blindness. So tonight, we're going to be having a small part of that conversation. Barbara Hamm Lee and I are going to be asking each other questions. And just for fun, we decided we weren't going to tell each other in advance what those questions were. But we also want this to be a community dialogue, so we want your participation. If you're not familiar with Zoom, you can go down to the bottom of your screen. There is an icon that says reactions. You can click on that, and then there's a bar just underneath it that says raise hand. We have several co-hosts who will be here to accept your hand raise, acknowledge it. We're going to ask you to turn on your microphone. They will enable that, and we'll ask you to turn on your microphone and make your comment or ask your question. We do have almost 60 people, as far as I know, at this point. So please, keep them short and to the point, so as many people who would like to can participate. So, introductions. My name is Andrew Smith. I am the Reader Services Librarian at Williamsburg Regional Library. I stand on ground that was stolen from the Powhatan people and cultivated by enslaved people and by their descendants who were never a full part of the society. I recently learned that I am descended from enslavers, which was a very difficult moment for me to discover. I am a middle-aged, white, cisgender, able-bodied male, non-disabled male, I should say, and I've been the unquestionable beneficiary of white privilege my entire life. So just so you know, everything that I talk about tonight is from my own experience. It's not reflecting any policy of the library, and that I will take any and all comments personally, and that is a good thing. So, and then our moderator, Barbara Hamm Lee, you all know, is an award-winning journalist. She's a television and radio host, and she is a facilitator who works with diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. She's the owner of Sharing Info LLC, a media and communications and DEIJ, which is the acronym for the diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice consulting company that helps organizations to strategically maximize their potential, to market effectively, and to protect their brand. She is best known, and this is how I know her, as the executive producer and the host of Another View, which is a weekly public radio talk show that discusses today's issues from an African American perspective. Barbara is an expert at navigating the difficult terrain of race relations. She specializes in diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice programming and leadership training for government agencies, schools, nonprofits, and corporations seeking racial cultural change. She is a native of Baltimore, Maryland, and married to Maxie Lee. And if you ever want to hear a good story, ask her how they met. And she has 2 daughters and a granddaughter. She is a summa cum laude graduate of Bennett College and attends First Baptist Church, Berkeley. So, Barbara, would you like to start off by asking our first question?
Well, first of all, thank you, Andrew, for this invitation. And it is so good to see all of you here this evening to embark upon this conversation. So, Andrew, I was sitting here trying to decide if I'm going to start with a hardball or a softball question. So I think
go hard.
I think we'll go hard. And I will tell you all that Andrew told me prior to this that he has specialized now in chocolate flavored shoe polish because he constantly puts his foot in his mouth. So here we go. This will be a lot of fun. But in all seriousness, so can you name something that you read in the book that made you pause and say, I've really got to check myself and my own feelings about racism?
I left my copy of the book in the other room. I can tell you single issues, there were so many individual ones. I think the one that really kind of whacked me over the head in a way that I had never thought about this issue before was their discussion of Rocky as being a parable about Black and white relations at that point. I'd never ever considered that, and I don't know why. So
actually, I had that same reaction about that. That's kind of interesting. Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Because again, a lot of times we experience things culturally and within media and so forth, and we don't ascribe the underlying meaning to it. We look at it as face value, I think sometimes, but when we really delve into what's going on and what it means, it takes on a different meaning.
Well, and it definitely reminded me of other times that I encountered different forms of art that as a much younger person I'd really enjoyed, and then had sort of independently come to the discovery that, whoa, this is seriously racist stuff. And those discoveries, this may be a huge take on it, but, it almost felt like a loss of innocence because they were I was discovering things that I had liked as a younger person, suddenly completely lost their any possibility of me enjoying them.
Can you give an example?
Tarzan. I read almost all of the Edgar Rice Burroughs books, and I think I was probably 7 or 8 when I first read Tarzan of the Apes. And then when I reread it at 12, Burroughs' description of the murderous things that Tarzan did to the African villagers who were living in his vicinity were just appalling, and I threw that aside and won't pick it up anymore, and can't even think of even wanting to go back and read that, or the John Carter of Mars series. Didn't want to go see the movie because I just felt like it was rooted in, if not an active encouragement, then certainly a tacit acknowledgement that lynching was okay. And
yeah, and it's not.
Yeah, well, yeah. So what about you? Did you?
Same question.
Yeah. Did you ever have a time when you revisited something?
You know, what struck me was the descriptions of segregationist, assimilationist, and anti-racist. And I realized that I have been in each one of those spaces, and I go back and forth between those spaces.
Hmm.
Um, and it's and my goal is to ultimately wind up in the anti-racist space and to be able to stay there. I recognize that in today's society, some assimilation, I think, is still necessary, even though I understand where Jason Reynolds was coming from in terms of, as he calls them, cowards, as being the cowardly way out. But also, I balance that with, but if you want to get anything done in a system that right now is still primarily run by white males,
Hmm.
then sometimes you have to assimilate so that you can get your foot in and start to make change from the inside out. And I fell into segregationists at certain times. And I'll give you a prime example. When George Floyd happened, and people who listened to my show reached out to me because they wanted answers. They wanted to know what to do. And I'm talking specifically about white people at this point. Um, because they didn't know where to turn, they didn't know what to say, they didn't know what to do, and they had questions, which was fine. And I got a lot of emails, and if any of you have ever written me or whatever, you know I do respond. And I got on the air the following, right after the George Floyd incident, and I asked people to give me some time because I needed to process as an African American woman going through and watching this man call out for his mother. I, I didn't know what to do with it. I mean, I had a lot of emotions and a lot of things. So I just asked people to just give me a little bit of time. I received a letter from a woman, an email, very long, involved email from this woman. She was white, and she was asking me, how do you basically deal with another family member who um, was not on the, or in her terms, I guess, the right track, and who didn't believe that there was anything wrong with what happened to George Floyd. And as I had said, I had asked on the air, please give me a couple of weeks to get back to you. Well, I didn't respond to her in her time frame. And in her white privilege, she sent me the nastiest letter about why I would not respond to her and how dare me not respond to her. You know, and in that moment, I was just like, you know what? Maybe we were better off if we all just did our own thing. Now, I didn't stay there long, but there are times where it just becomes so overwhelming to have to navigate in a world that you know you're really not accepted by some, you know, and they make that very plain and very clear. Clearly, what we saw on January 6th is yet another example of how we're showing that there are parts of this country that just aren't ready to
Hmm.
to move to anti-racism. They can't even get to assimilationists at this point.
Yeah.
So that for me was kind of the recurring theme as I read through all of his material. That, and the other one was the whole idea of the use of literature and reading and how much it makes a difference in the way that people are indoctrinated into thinking. Um, and how it was used to perpetuate racism and how it continues to be used in that manner.
Hmm. Yeah, I was raised by, there's no way to put it otherwise, by an assimilationist, um, who didn't recognize that, well, actually both of my parents were afforded opportunities that I don't think any African American people um, in their same communities would have been afforded. And it once again, this was one of those flash moments that that what they used to say was, well, if they would only go to school and learn how to talk properly, and then they would be able to get jobs. And it was the whole uplift suasion argument. And for those of you who haven't read the book, it's basically the idea that for Black people to succeed, they have to become like white people, or at least make themselves safe for white people to be around. And so that was, I mean, I am pro education. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love. I don't think anybody can get anywhere without education, but I don't think that education ought to be a way of, or I have learned not that education doesn't have to be the same as indoctrination.
Exactly. Well, and the other piece of that too, because Black people were taught that if you didn't learn how to speak like white people, if you didn't follow those norms, then you could not succeed. And so you got the double whammy, because you had white people on the one side saying, step up your game. If you want to be with us, you have to do this. And then you have people in your own community going, why are you acting white?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you talking like that? Why are you putting us down? Why, go to any family reunion in a Black family, and you hear the full range from those who had very little education, but plenty of common sense and knew how to work and how to navigate the world, all the way through to your PhDs and so forth. And that division, even within the family, of oh, you think you're cute, oh, you think you're this, because you're educated or whatever. And so that that was yet another, to me, opportunity for racism to tear apart the society, the Black community, as opposed to helping to mend it and lift it up.
Again, I want to invite anyone who's here watching and listening to us. We do want you to be part of this conversation. So if you have comments, if you have questions, please use that reactions and raise your hand, and one of our co-hosts will get to you. So your turn.
My turn. Okay.
Your turn.
All right. So let's talk about the style of the book for a moment.
Okay.
Do you think it was too flippant for such a heavy topic, or was it perfect particularly for younger people who really need to understand their history before they can learn to move on? And some adults who don't want to do the heavy lifting, that this was a good way to write the book so that you could engage better. I'm just curious from a librarian's perspective, what you thought about the style of the book.
Neil and I both talked about this. Neil Holland's a co-worker at Williamsburg Regional Library, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, Neil. But we talked about it, and yes, there were times that it was flip, and there were a lot of what he called bad dad jokes. Being a bad dad joker, I couldn't see them. But there were some issues that I think he skated over in a way that Stamped from the Beginning does dig into more. But I would hope that would not be the last place that somebody went for this level of information, for this kind of learning. But as you say, it is a book that is addressed to an audience who might not pick it up without that conversational tone. And so the book, Ms. Harris, that we're talking about is called Stamped, and it was written by a young adult author by the name of Jason Reynolds. He and Dr. Ibram Kendi worked together to do what they called a remix of Kendry's book, which is much more, I'm not going to say scholarly, but it deals with things at a much deeper level than Stamped does. So Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi was the source material. And this one, yes, it was lightened up. I think that the writing style is, as I said, more conversational. The first time I read it, I thought, oh my, are readers going to gravitate to it? And the more I read it, the more I thought, this is a jumping off place, and we should treat it as a jumping off place. Bad dad jokes aside.
You know what I find is really interesting when I do my DEIJ training. People always ask for references or other articles to read and so forth, but they always want, give me something short, give me something, bite sized that I can digest. This is hard work.
Yes.
If you really, truly want to learn about being an anti racist, it is hard work and you can't skate through it. You've got to be willing at some point to get into it and really do the hard reading and really study the history, study how this country has come together. You were talking, Andrew, earlier about your innocence, losing your innocence at 12 with Tarzan, that type of innocence. I'm talking about historical innocence. But for me, it's really interesting because all the way up through my probably mid 30s or so, I really believed that this country was at a point where we were really trying to do the right thing, and that our government was not as complicit as it really is in terms of continuing to perpetuate racism. And that was an eye opener for me. That was my, oh really? You mean the government really does that? So I was very naive in that. And so when I hear, while I think that this book, I think it's perfect for young folks, and I think it's perfect for those of us who adults who are just starting to get into the race space. It's a really good place to start because it piques your curiosity on other things. Um, but my encouragement is to go deeper and go and really do your homework and really study.
Uh,
Um,
it,
Yeah,
sorry,
I'm
I
looking
feel like
at
I'm
this
getting.
comment, How to Be an Adult, an Anti-Racist. Yes, absolutely. That
Yeah.
is a book that definitely should be read also.
As part of my background preparation for all of this, I also read White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo.
Yes.
And when you were talking about the woman who wrote the letter to you, asking and then demanding and then severely criticizing you for not being able to provide the answers
In her time frame.
in her time frame, yes, was exactly the kind of thing that Robin DiAngelo wrote about. I definitely would not suggest starting with that. I think that people need to really ground themselves in the background and the beginning of the ideas before you start really getting in and analyzing yourself, your behavior, to the degree that she asks for. But that just may be my fragility, because, like I say, it's a hard topic.
It is. It's a tough topic, but it's a necessary topic if we're going to make any change. I mean, we
Mhm.
can't. We keep dancing around it, and we keep talking about, you know, people say, "Well, I'm tired of talking. When can we do some action?" But at the same time, if we don't talk to each other, we can't get to a place where we can do action, meaning changing policy or changing the systems, because we don't understand each other and we don't understand why what we have right now does not work and why it has to change. So you have to do the homework. And I mean the mere fact that you guys all here tonight, it to me is very encouraging that there's at least some interest in taking a look at this and figuring it out. Maybe everybody's not on the same page, may not be as far along as your neighbor, but you're at least here and paying attention.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and it's another reason that we wanted to give people an outlet, to know that this conversation is going on and needs to continue going on. Um, Do you remember, I mean, you mentioned sort of having your eyes open to the complicity of the government. Do you remember a particular time or even the first time when you realized that white people were being treated differently from people who look like you?
Um, I grew up in Baltimore. We moved to the house that I grew up in when I was 4 years old in 1961. My mother was from North Carolina and was used to space. And if you know anything about Baltimore, you know that it's all about row houses. And she told my dad that I want a house that I can walk all the way around. So I need a yard and I need a house. We were the second Black family to move into the um, neighborhood. When I went to Pimlico Elementary School, I was one of two Black students in the entire school at kindergarten. When I graduated from elementary school in sixth grade. Back then we had junior high, not middle school. So in sixth grade, I think there may have been two white kids in the whole school. I watched white flight in real time, where everybody just started selling their houses and they were out of there because more and more Black people were starting to buy homes uh, in the area. So that and the fact that in high school I was in what we call the A course, the advanced courses for college prep, and again there were you could count the number of African American students in that track on one hand. And again, I saw the difference between the college recruiters that would come and which classes they would talk to and which ones they wouldn't. Um, so, so yeah, I mean, I've experienced it my whole life. When Martin Luther King died and the riots happened in Baltimore, and I was 10 years old, and I vividly remember um, taking the black ribbon and nailing it to our front door and tying it around the antenna of our car. How long ago was that, right? But that was your signal that this home is owned and this car is owned by a Black family, so don't burn it. Yeah. So
Uh, we
I vividly remember that.
we had a question. Tom, did someone? Okay, here we go.
Yes,
Hi.
no, you talked about some of the reading and the hard work.
Mhm.
I'm just getting started in this and I'm interested in that and in pursuing it. So I'm just wondering whether the two of you could suggest now or maybe after some discussion after this is over, what would be the first two or three books we might read or videos we might watch, or what would be maybe the first 6 months we would start with. So I don't necessarily want you to answer that now or expect you to answer that now, but that's one thing I'm wondering about.
Okay.
You mentioned white.
Actually, Tom, I can tell you one thing right off the top that I use constantly. But if you go to TED Talks and in the search bar just type in racism and watch any one of the videos that pop up, because they cover all kinds of a full range of different groups, different ideas about racism, and so forth. And if you like TED Talks, I just happen clearly I'm a talk show host, but but I just find listening to people expound and talk about their ideas and all gives me a lot of pleasure. So that might be an easy way for you to get started.
That's a great idea. I love TED Talks and they're digestible.
Yes,
They're not,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
There are a number of comments and some questions. Um, let's see that, and there are some suggestions for reading, and I certainly would endorse The Warmth of Other Suns.
Oh,
If you
yes.
want to, isn't it? That's a wonderful book.
That's a
And
wonderful book.
I'm sorry, I forget the title of the most recent one that she has out. It's
Yes, it's
just
called
come out.
Cast. Cast.
Cast, yes, yes. And that let's see, um, Sally Marcello from William and Mary says that she wonders about the potential for literature taught well to enlighten and open the minds of people, since it can be used to negatively support or endorse racism. She notes that how different the literature selections in her daughter's high school curriculum were from her own in the 70s. If there are books of literature that you or I might mention that could help shift the perspective of young people and open constructive dialogues. For example, her daughter's curriculum included A Lesson Before Dying, and Their Eyes Were Watching God, and The House of the Spirits. Do you have any particular titles that you can think of?
You know, I'm trying to think what I would recommend. I love reading Baldwin. Now I've kind of rediscovered him, and have a much deeper understanding now of some of his writings and what that was about. Let me think on that for a minute, and I'll come back
Yeah.
with a couple. But to that point, though, Andrew, I wanted to ask you: would Stamped the Remix have been in the Williamsburg Library 10 years ago?
Yes, it would. I can tell you, I've been working there for close to 20 years, and we are, I hope, and we've been doing some diversity audits. I'm certain that we would have had it in there. It would have been in the young adult collection, and so I'm glad that we were able to get it and put it into the adult collection for that exposure. But yes, we don't try to dodge, we don't try to gatekeep. We buy things that are well reviewed, and regardless of their political beliefs or what they ask people to reconsider. I don't feel like I'm saying that very well, but I think that you will all find that libraries that crave the opportunity to get the material that will get people thinking and talking. So yes.
Wow, that's great. I want to mention a book that is a contemporary book today, and it's fiction, but it really addresses some of the issues. Somebody asked a question about racism in Hampton Roads.
Yes.
And the name of the book is The Emancipation of Evan Walls. I had the author on my show. His name is Jeffrey Blount, and he's from DC, but he grew up in Smithfield. Now, he talks about a fictional town, but it's that Smithfield area. And just read, and again, it's fiction, but the whole premise of his life was that he grew up, he became a ball player, he fell in love with a white girl, and what he went through from the white community, what he went through from the Black community, and all of the dynamics that were happening in this rural town. And so it's a fascinating book. It's a quick read, but it's really good. It's called The Emancipation of Evan Walls.
Okay.
By Jeffrey Blount.
If we have not, okay, let's see. If we have not yet gotten it at Williamsburg Regional Library, we will certainly be getting it very soon.
Good.
I'm having a hard time coming up with specific titles that that in a major way that I think could be could be a better introduction, specific fiction titles that could be a better introduction to the impact. There's one called Homegoing by Yag Yazi, which is the parallel stories of two half-sisters, one of whom stays in Africa as, I guess, the concubine of the commander of one of the slave forts. The other half sister is enslaved and sent to America, and so we have these parallel lives that are very illustrative of the different experiences, and neither one of them positive, not wholly positive. Neil has told me that he's going to get Emancipation of Evan Walls on order tomorrow. So for those of you who are Williamsburg, James City, York County residents, please keep an eye out for that.
There's also a book, if you're into sports, in particular, I just happen to like this guy because my husband is a big sports guy, so it makes me watch ESPN and those talk shows on Fox and all that. But it's called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, and it's by Emmanuel Acho. And it is, it really, he's talking about his experiences through the NFL, through sports, and what has happened to him. And so that's another one that you might want to take a look at. These are books that I think for Black authors, just the whole idea of being able to express what life is like on a day-to-day basis, in this country from their perspective really gives you a lot of insight into how alike we are in many ways, but how different our lives are. And the thing that I loved about Stamped, the remix, is that to be anti-racist just means that it's okay. So if my life is what it is, not saying that the negative parts of it are okay and that they don't need to be improved and so forth, but it's not because of the color of my skin.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference. And
Mm-hmm.
and or the color of a Hispanic person's skin, or the other groups. But in particular, the tension between Black and white is just still so prevalent. And I know a lot of other minorities get upset. I've heard them and they've told me, but what about us? And I'm not negating that in any way, form, or fashion. But the fact of the matter is, Black people were brought here through slavery, unlike other people who got here, and have had a very specific relationship or lack thereof in this country that is very different from other minority groups. I'm not saying other minority groups don't face discrimination and face racism, they do. But it's different, and people get really antsy and upset when Black folks want to say, we need to focus on our issues because it's been 400 years since the first Africans arrived in Hampton at Fort Comfort. And things are we're still struggling today. And it's 401 now, years later. So
we have another question that came in via direct message to what role does the differences in socioeconomic levels have on racism? Do we miss that issue when we talk about racism, or what appears to be racism? Am I uninformed to ask this question?
No, you're not uninformed to ask the question. It's a really good question. So here's the thing. Poor people across the board, no matter what your race, creed, color, there are poor people. Because of the systemic racism in this country, there are more poor Black people because we haven't been given the opportunities to live in certain neighborhoods, to have certain jobs, to have the economic, the ability to buy a house so you can build in generational wealth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People who are privileged, meaning that they have reached a certain economic level, that they do own a house, they do have a good job, and so forth. still face racism. They face it in being overlooked for promotions. They face, if you've been paying attention to CBS, the CBS owned and operated stations in the country, the two top executives have just been put on, just been suspended based on their comments about Black reporters
I had not heard that.
and so forth. So even though you so-called made it, there's still issues, no matter how high up you climb that ladder, that racism plays a role. And you may navigate it differently than what a person of fewer means does, but you still face it and you still have to deal with it.
Barbara, could I chime into that point?
Yes, who's that?
My name is Melanie.
Oh,
Davis.
hi, Melanie. Oh, okay, I'm
Hi.
sorry.
No
Hi.
problem. Yeah, I'd like to speak to that point. I was fortunate enough to have been raised with economic privilege. We lived in a way maybe 5% that Black America did. You would not change your life with me if you were a poor white.
Right.
Money doesn't make any difference to the way systemic racism arranges our life in this country.
First of all, because you're assumed, A, not to even be in that class of people to begin with.
Correct. Correct.
And then when you are identified that way, then it becomes, well, how dare you? How did you get
Yes.
here?
Yes,
why are
right.
you, who let you in the door?
Right.
Where, instead of it being, again, another way to build us up, there are those that would put barriers in the way.
Right. And having had the opportunity to live abroad, it is a completely different experience where, you just get to be a person, maybe just a woman first or a person, but people haven't already decided who you are and what your limitations are just because of the amount of melanin in your skin.
And that's to me is Jason Reynolds' point about anti-racist, not making an assumption about who somebody is simply because of the color of their skin, but to be able to find out who they are for real as a person, and then make your decision.
There was an article, a column in the Washington Post several weeks ago by one of their, I think, economic reporters who decided she was going to turn the column in the direction of microaggressions, talking about how she and her husband and child were standing in the line for the I don't even know what it's called, fast pass to board an airline, to get into the airport, and some guy came over and said, "Oh, well, that's not the line you want to be in. You want to be in this one over here." And so, that, and she talked about those things building up, and that was a term that we also talked about when we heard from a presenter on racial trauma. Do you, or Ms. Davis, if you don't mind answering this question, do you find those microaggressions, do they come across regularly? And
Mm-hmm.
is it I hate to say, is it easy to spot them?
Yeah, it's real easy to spot them because you feel it. I mean, honestly, it is a visceral reaction because, and depending on where you are in life and the situation that you're in, you've learned to either suppress it for the moment but inside your head, Black folks are constantly having this whole conversation. Wait a minute, what did they mean by that? Am I reading this right? Am I looking at it through a racial lens, or were they really just kidding? Or, I mean, there's this whole conversation that in the split second is going through your head as you analyze what was just said, and then recognize that in fact it was a microaggression. And they happen all the time. I mean, I get the how did you learn to speak so well?
So articulate.
You get that one too, Ms. Davis?
I'm articulate in several languages. but that is not what they mean.
Do I have time,
Well-spoken for a
Andrew,
Black
to tell a
person.
quick story?
Sure.
And some of you who have heard me speak before may probably have heard this story, but I'll try to make it as short as possible. So I worked in Baltimore, as I told you, at the powerhouse station WJZ, and we were doing a set of stories about Baltimore neighborhoods. And we decided we were going to do a story on a neighborhood called Rogers Forge, very old neighborhood, very established neighborhood. And the reason that we were focusing on Rogers Forge was because Jean became the first woman to be allowed to be president of the Civic League. Because prior to, women were only allowed to become members of the Garden Club. They weren't allowed to do the administration of the neighborhood. So she was the first woman, and so that's what gave us the impetus to promote her. She and I had been on the phone with each other for an entire week, setting up times we were coming, so forth. And the very last day, and it was a Friday because it is burned forever in my brain. It was a Friday, and I called Jean just to reconfirm everything for that Monday morning. And she says, Barbara, she says, now tell me again who's coming to my house. And so I explained that it's the anchor and the reporter, anchor, myself, a photographer, and an audio guy. This is back in the day when we had full crews. And Jean says, oh, okay. Well, I hope none of those people are Black. I hate Black people. And I was holding the phone and I was like, and I said, Jean, I have to call you back. I mean, I was so stunned, I couldn't even respond. So I hung up the phone. I called my crew in. And as I was telling them what happened, the phone rings and it's Jean. And she says, you know, Barbara, I was just thinking about our conversation. And she said, I think you may have misunderstood me. It's not that I hate Black people. She said, actually, they make me laugh. Well, that's when I got mad. And I said, Jean, you know what? I'm Black and I'm coming to your house on Monday. And she said, oh my God, I thought I was talking to a white woman.
See,
Okay,
that's not a
there's so much wrong in all of that, right? We go to her house that Monday. My audio guy was African American. He refused to step on her property, so he ran audio from across the street. The anchor photographer and I went to the door. She opened the door. She was clearly nervous. And she says, my husband said, you can only go in the living room. You can't go in any other part of the house. And I said, oh, Jean, no. I said, I have to look around. I want to make sure you're setting the best light and to have the best background. And so I'm going to be honest, you guys, the devil got all in me. I touched everything in that house I could put my hands on. And we did the interview. And after it was over, she said to me, Barbara, you know what? This was one of the best experiences. I had no idea this would be like this. And I'm sorry what I said. She said, but she said, as a matter of fact, we want to invite you and your crew to our holiday party. We always have a big holiday party. And she said, and the last thing she said to me was, so I want you to come, but if you're late, I'm going to put a broom in your hand so you can clean up. And at that point, I was like, well, okay, I could either go ballistic on this woman or I could just recognize that she's an older white woman. This is her orientation. And I showed her through my actions what a professional I was and that I belonged here and that I was supposed to do this job here. But, you know, some people, it's worth trying to fight to make the change. You just have to say, you know what? Next generation, maybe we'll get better. And that's why I'm so encouraged by our younger folks today because they do interact more. They interact more than I'm a baby boomer. I mean, we started it, but they really have taken it to the next level and the next level. And when I look at my 11-year-old granddaughter and her class, although she's in a private school and there still aren't enough people of color in that school. So it's still constant that we're constantly trying to make it better.
If I could ask you too about a term that I often hear used in conjunction with younger people, and I'd like to find out what you and perhaps anybody else who would like to contribute, and Jason Reynolds also talks about this, the term woke. What is your take on that term? What do you think of when you hear that?
I think of woke as people who are really paying attention and acknowledging that there is racism in this country and that it affects people in many different ways. And they're not looking to skirt the blame. And it's not blame, because I think that's a wrong term.
Okay.
Right? The fact of the matter is, this has been going on in our country since the very beginning, and it's been going on in our world. If you read Jason's book, you will see it from the very beginning of time. Okay, there's always been this separation. But for me, people who are woke are actually paying attention and trying to learn and trying to do better at this race thing that we're dealing with now. And they're not the first ones to say, but I didn't own slaves and my family didn't own slaves. Well, see, when you start with that premise, to me, that you're already trying to dismiss what is history and what has already happened. And if we don't come to grips with our history, we can't move forward to change that history. So that's what it means to me. But I'd be curious to hear from other participants on the call.
I could actually say, Andrew, I would go back to what you said earlier today. Your privilege means that you've had the ability to sleepwalk through life in this country. And so being woke means you took whatever the matrix pill was that made you see your life isn't our life. And so that's what woke means. It's like, oh, I actually see what's happening. So I'm agreeing with you, Barbara. That's right.
Yeah. Kathy had a comment, I believe.
Yeah, Kathy, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I saw she had raised her hand.
Yes,
Here.
I'm a very practically minded person, and I know the importance of history, and I've been in a course now for the last several months with a group, and we've read many of the books that you've listed. So my thought is, okay, where do we go from here? How are we instrument in changing things in our culture? And I think I mentioned it last night. There is an article, 103 Things I Can Do to Abolish Racism. And it's really interesting. They're small things, but they're particular things in our legal system, education system, healthcare, small things that maybe would require a letter or a time to talk to someone. So that's why I think, okay, let's do something. How can we reach out, make things better for our world? And by the way, Barbara, I grew up in Baltimore also. And so I understand your stories, right? Just for I grew up in the West End, and that became integrated a little at a time. But I know how Baltimore is, and actually, this is funny. You have a Baltimore accent, even.
Well, I will say Kathy shared the 103 ways, along with a list of Black-owned businesses in the Williamsburg area. We need to format it so that we can get it onto the library's webpage. So you can find a link to that 103 ways. And by the way, anybody who knows of other resources or organizations, or we've had a wonderful list of books, of other books that you think that other people might benefit from, please send them to me. My email address, I hope, is very simple. It's asmith@wrl.org, because as I said, this is not a one-time thing. You know, we're not going to be getting to the end of February and saying, "Let's solve all the problems." So,
You know, I'd like to suggest a couple things. One is speak up. You know, it's not up to, it's particularly those of us in the corporate world. You know, it is not fair for the only people to raise racial issues to be the minority that is dealing with the racial issue. That's just dead wrong. You know, so if you see it and you know it's wrong, then speak up and say something about it. You know, call out your coworker or whatever, or just say, you know what, this is not something that in my department I'm comfortable with you all doing, or however you want to say it. But to speak up and to say something, I think is really important. For the holidays, I made a very conscious decision to purchase the corporate gifts that I bought from African American vendors, and gave them, and I wrote a little note and gave their website and talked about, you know, what their specialty is, to help promote them and to help them to be able to, you know, garner more business. There are a variety of things. I know a lot of people have talked about, well, you know, who have you invited to your house? Have you had dinner with somebody who doesn't look like you? And that's a way to do it. But you know what? Let's be honest, folks. People are comfortable with whom they're comfortable with, and I get that. So for me, it is more about the other interactions that we do on a day-to-day basis, where we interact with each other in the doctor's office, at the grocery store, you know, out in church. Church is a big one where people, as Martin Luther King used to say, 11 o'clock on Sunday was the most segregated hour in America. You know, so you can invite somebody to come to church with you, or to come to join your book club, or join your board. I was sitting on a panel to select some grant recipients for an organization recently. And one of the questions that we asked in the application process was to the makeup of the board of the organizations applying. And I was just floored. And I don't know why I was floored, because I know that this is true. But the lack of diversity on boards, and especially on nonprofits, is unbelievable. And don't call me, because I can't do another board.
yes.
But we tend to serve people, again, being comfortable, they tend to circulate the same folks. And what I'm saying is, pay attention, look out for some other people that may bring a wealth of knowledge and enthusiasm to your group, that, you know, if you don't ask them, you never get to experience what they can bring to the table, and they don't get an opportunity to participate. And so that's another way to increase the way that we are able to interact with each other. Because I'm telling you, when you talk to somebody one on one, it's really, really hard to call them a name when you know them personally.
Well, I will say that when I looked at her in-depth biography, that Barbara is on probably too many boards.
Yes.
Um, so,
Well,
and
at
she
least
and I
now
were,
they stopped saying to me, because I mean, when I first started on the boards, people would be very blunt. You know what? We only asked you because they told us we have to have a person of color on this board. I mean, they would just say that. It's like, okay, well, you know, hopefully by the time my tenure was up, they had a little change of heart. And no, my dad was not Dr. Gary Hamm. My dad's name was Charles Osborne Hamm, and he was a police officer with the Toll Facilities Police in Maryland, and he was the first African American to make the rank of captain. And he is no longer with us, but I get my radicalism from my daddy.
let's hear it for dads.
Andrew, we have someone who has a question, Rebecca Vinroot.
Oh, hi, Rebecca.
Hi, sorry. So, Barbara, you're your story about the woman that we went to her house and at the end, she was basically saying what I took from it, you taught me that not all Black people are bad, basically. And so she kind of put you in this box. And I think, something that I've learned, and I've had a conversation with a colleague about this, is that, it's also a privilege to assume that as a person, that you as a Black person are supposed to teach me. That I guess, I'm trying to be cognizant of doing the work that I need to do, but not asking somebody to help me do that work. I know one Black person or that Black person, and say, you teach me. And that's, I think, a very privileged way to be, but also something I think, in my experience, people feel comfortable doing because they don't want to say the wrong thing. And so they go to who they're comfortable with, but they end up kind of overload that person, and kind of creating, in some ways, because you're asking that person, just like we're basically asking you right now, tell us your stories that were hard for you. So that kind of re-traumatization of you going there and telling your experience to make me feel better or to teach me is almost the opposite of what I think we should do. But at the same time, I don't know what it's like because I haven't lived in that world. So I'm not really sure it's a question or just a comment or, but I just cognizant of that.
You're right on target in terms of back to when George Floyd died. I mean, there was a lot of resentment, quite frankly, that people expected, and not only me, but the Black folks that they knew, to be able to explain this whole thing to them. We had no idea this was happening. Do you know how insulting that is to hear someone say, I had no idea that that this group of people were experiencing life in such a way or were treated by police in this way, and you had no idea. Because that means that we were invisible to you. I mean, how could you not know from Trayvon Martin through Michael Brown through Freddie Gray? I mean, and the list goes on. Breonna Taylor, the list goes on and on and on. And those are just the ones that made the national news. Don't get it twisted that there are things that are happening within individual communities all over this country that don't make the national news, that are just as heinous. And so to hear people say, I had no idea, somebody said before, you took the magic pill. I think that was you, Ms. Davis, that you took the magic pill and woke up. To expect us to just turn around and do all this teaching and to bare our souls is not fair, and it's not right. And sometimes you just have to go off and do your own internal thinking first and figure out, okay, have I ever said anything? Say to yourself, what have I ever said to somebody or have I ever said something to someone that could have been thought of as being offensive or was insensitive to who they are as a Black person or a brown person or red person or any of the groups. But since I'm African American, I focus on African Americans.
Yeah.
You have to do that work yourself, and then you should still. It's okay if you have a trusted friend that you feel that you can talk with, but this whole idea of saying the wrong thing. Okay, Emmett Till, right, was murdered because he supposedly whistled at a white woman, right? Did I get that right? Right.
That's what they say.
That's what they say. That's a punishment for saying the wrong thing. I don't think any of you, if you said something that was racially insensitive, worry about the fact that you're going to be murdered for making that statement. Now, that may sound a little harsh, but it's true. And so being afraid to say the wrong thing that's what did he call? He called assimilationists cowards.
Mm-hmm.
That's the cowardly way to me. I'd rather you say the wrong thing and let me say to you, you know why that's the wrong thing, and tell you, than for you to sit back and say nothing and let things continue the way that they are. So this fear of saying the wrong thing, you know, because I hear it a lot in a lot of my trainings all the time. Everybody's so worried about saying the wrong thing. You know what? You're not. It's so you say the wrong thing, they'll correct you, and it might be a little embarrassing, but guess what? You'll get over it, and you won't do it again, and you'll learn from it. Just like you raise your hand in class and you give the wrong answer. You stop raising your hand in class when you were coming up in school? No. So yeah. So Rebecca, I think you're right. It's not fair to always expect the person who has been oppressed to have to explain it to the oppressors. And I'm saying that in a very general sense. I'm not saying that specifically to individuals.
Well, Spike Lee called it the magic Negro syndrome. And I think if you go back and you look at movies particularly, but it's also occurred in some books where, as Rebecca says, the white character turns to a singular Black person and suddenly their soul is washed clean and everything is okay. Whereas it really is, it's so much more of an evolution, and the conversation that you have with this person is not going to wipe you clean, but you shouldn't expect that.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody asked a question in the chat that they don't understand how patriotic and how many Black people declare their love for this country in spite of how they're treated. My response to that is, first of all, this is our country. It's where we were born, we were raised, we were part of it, and just like every other patriotic person, there are things about it we don't like, there are things about it we do love, but we are a part of this country, and we just want to be accepted as a part of this country. Doesn't mean we want to be like anybody else. We just want to be accepted for who we are in this country. Some of it you could say, well, I mean, when you look at the indoctrination from slavery into where the culture was stripped, the language was stripped, the religion was stripped, and you were told you were made into Americans, or you were made into this country. So when you take away all of your native uh, um, cultures and mores and so forth, and force people to follow a different one as the generations go along, that's what they know. So yes, we are connected to this country. There are a lot of things we don't like about this country and how we're treated, and that's why we're trying to make that change and to speak up about what's going on and what's wrong now. And allies, people who are woke, those who recognize that things have to change, and that we need to move from segregationists and assimilationists to anti-racists, are coming along with us to help in that fight.
I don't know if
Somebody's raising their hand. QH.
Yes, sorry, it's Beth. Sorry, it just doesn't come through that way. Hi, I'm also a Marylander. I'm on the other side of Maryland. I'm on the PG County side near the.
Oh, I work for Prince
district
George's
line.
County Police.
But we kind of claim DC because we're closer to there, But I am also with All Together. Barbara, I think you know about us.
Yeah.
Several of our members are in the room right now. I just wanted to say that we are here All Together Williamsburg. If you want to, .org is our email or our website. We also do a Black Lives Matter lemonade stand booth. Saturdays from March to October down on Duke of Gloucester Street during the farmers market. This is our 5th year. We go down and talk to the community about why Black Lives Matter. So myself and community members, we person a booth And we have literature, we have book lists, and we engage the community in conversation. And it's been one of the most amazing things that I've done in my life, encountering and talking about the community. And I will say that at least every single time that I am there, at least a person will stand and talk with us for at least an hour about a question or a comment or wanted more information. We create a safe place to do that. And I think engaging people in conversation can do so much for advancing, giving people an opportunity to talk about these books, engaging the conversation. We also have a bystander training coming up on February 2nd.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, and we're kind of excited about that as well. So there's opportunities to join in and to engage in it. Run for school board, run for city council too. Those are also areas where we can change some things in our community that that really need our eyes on them. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, Beth.
Thanks for
Appreciate
everything
that.
you do.
Yeah, that organization is wonderful. I've spoken to you guys a couple of times and done some things with you. And so I'm glad to see everything is still going well. That's great. So, Andrew, I have a question for you.
Yes, I've been waiting. I'm afraid
Because when she brought up the whole idea about Black Lives Matter, because Reynolds deals with that in the book also.
Mhm.
But this is a question I've always been curious about since people ask me about the Black experience. What is it about saying Black Lives Matter? Why is that so threatening to white people? I'm really curious as to why that is so threatening. Because the first thing out of my mouth is all lives matter.
Yeah.
When that's not what we're saying at all. So
No,
why is it so threatening?
It doesn't say only Black Lives Matter. It says Black Lives Matter.
Right.
yeah. And I can't answer that question. And I dearly wish I could dig into the mind of the kind of person that could do that and just kind of root around and find out where that comes from.
Mhm.
I can tell you, I mean, the best responses that I've heard to it, the yes, all lives matter, but until Black lives matter, it doesn't make any difference. Yes, all lives matter, but Black lives are endangered. I honestly don't know why that is. I do know that in other conversations, that, and I don't even know if this is related, but that there are some people who are alienated by the idea that, it's that we've just, in my lifetime, we've gone from Negro to Black to Afro-American to African-American to Black person of color, and not knowing any particular day. And I think that what terms we're supposed to use, and that it creates a level, and again, this is just I'm putting this on other people because I don't feel, but it creates a level of such uncertainty that it becomes something to fear. I think people who are opposed to the idea of Black Lives Matter are they're just incomprehensible to me. So I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for you. I've never read anything from anybody that was anything other than the bumper sticker response. Nobody's ever sat down, or I've never read anything by anybody who said, well, here's why I think that.
Rebecca wrote, it's almost like there's a limited amount of lives that can matter, which is a part of the perceived threat that something will be taken away from white people and their feelings of being in the majority. Another term that Jason Reynolds addresses, which is true. To me, this whole, it's like grabbing hold to that last piece of power because the country is changing. And in, what is it, 2050 or so, the late 2040s, 2050, it will be majority Black, brown. And there is a definite fear that means no more power, I wonder at times, is there a thought that, oh my God, what if they decide to treat us like we treated them? And is that a fear, a definite fear that some people may experience and may be thinking about? And so the whole idea of trying to maintain as much power as possible or as long as possible when there's room for everybody.
Mhm.
I mean, social and economics aside, just looking strictly at race, there is room for everybody in this United States of America that we have. And this whole power struggle thing is very, very interesting because there is a shift that is going on, and people are going to either go along with the shift and kind of let it morph into what it's going to morph into, and then there are going to be those that are going to try to hold on to the status quo for as long as they possibly can. You know, Wanda Bird wrote an online post to help out white men said, "Why do whoops? Just lost it. Ah, there it is. Why do Black Lives Matter now?" And again, it's that whole idea of if we've always mattered. Well, we should have always mattered if we didn't in people's lives. You know, as I used to tell people all the time, African Americans had have we have always had to learn how to navigate in a white society. White people have never had to learn unless you chose to navigate in a black society. You could go through your entire day outside of, you know, um, service industry help, that kind of thing. If you wanted to, you could live in an entirely white world if you really wanted to. We can't do that because because the job who we go to work for is probably more than likely a white person. You know, where we go to school, more than likely the white teachers are teaching the predominantly black classrooms. I mean, there's no getting away from it, and so there is that equality is not there. So we have to learn how to navigate. All we're saying is, if we're going to have an anti-racist society, let's learn how to navigate through all of the different facets of our society as people.
I think again, as Miss Davis said that if you're white, you can sleepwalk through life, and I guess I mean just projecting my own metaphor. If you're black, you're tightrope walking through life, and so again I can't explain, I can't even understand myself the idea behind the opposition to the Black Lives Matter. Um, Other than as Rebecca said, there are many white people who don't want to be made uncomfortable, and that if they have to look at George Floyd, or if they have to read about Trayvon Martin or Tamir Rice, that it makes them somewhere down in themselves uncomfortable. And so the only way that they have of avoiding that is to say, well, what makes you special?
There's when we look at, because we you can talk about racism on a very individual level, and then you also have the systemic level. And I'll just leave you with this because I know we're running out of time. But one of the most stark recent events in my mind is if you look at the system and how it treated crack, and the system and how it's treating the opioid epidemic. Because, oh my God, now it's a health issue.
Right.
When before it was a criminal issue. You're a criminal if you use this drug. Now, a drug that you can get and you have a health problem and you can get help and you need mental health counseling and you need physical counseling and so forth. It again is how we use the system in order to oppress one, elevate the other. So just things to think about as we go through. Yeah, look at what
Because
happened.
the cost of overdose is the same, right, Barbara? You know, you're living in desperation, you don't have work, you're feeling hopeless, and you turn to drugs. And so as
Exactly.
you say, when it's Black and brown people, you know, it's clearly because it's a criminal issue.
And even with the criminal issue, I mean, think about it. There's a wonderful documentary I just saw on Netflix that's all about the crack epidemic.
Mhm.
And I strongly suggest you guys watch it because it's incredible. Just looking at it because it examines everything. But you know, two pieces. How did the guy explain it? Two pieces of crack that would fit on top of a quarter. They'll get you 5 years or more in prison.
Mhm.
You know, where 500 of those that same amount in a powder form, you know, may get you a fine. And so even before we even got to the opioids, just in the terms of cocaine and crack, the difference in who they locked up and for how long they locked these folks up and so forth. The woman who got home arrest from the Capitol. She lives in Pennsylvania,
Yes.
I believe, and she got home arrest. The black guy, the one black face that you kept seeing on all the insurrection video and so forth, is still in jail.
And she stole a laptop, even knowing that it might have national
She used her
security.
laptop, even though that was one of the conditions that she was not supposed to. She's wearing
Yeah.
an ankle bracelet at home. Yeah, the Netflix show is called Crack. Thank you. Um, she's at home, ankle bracelet. She's been online. She's violated, you know, the conditions and the whole bit. This guy is still in jail. I don't even think he's had his hearing yet. He's just sitting there. So, you know, I mean, you just look at the disparity. Look around you. It's so blatant at times. But only it's only blatant if you're willing to see it for what it is. It's not blatant if you think that it's okay.
Well, and we were talking about the cocaine versus crack, and which leads to another layer that was something that I've been thinking a lot about this stuff, you know, and digging more into my own life just over the course of the last 4 months, um, uh, which would be the presence of law enforcement in encounters with law enforcement. And so, yes, we've got the over-policed African-American neighborhoods, and then somebody who is caught up in it probably can't afford a lawyer, whereas somebody who's got a brick of cocaine, you know, may be able to come up with the resources to hire an attorney. That might be another difference. But from my own experience, living in Virginia Beach, which was well known for its racist police force. I don't know if that's still the case, but I remember being 16 and sitting on the boardwalk with some beer and some friends, and we were just hanging out, you know, with our feet dangling over, and a cop came over and said, you know, throw those away and get out of here. I can't imagine what would have happened if it had been for Black kids who were sitting there doing the exact same thing. Actually, that's not true. I can't imagine what would have happened. It
You know,
just didn't occur to me.
I have people on call me on another view, and they say, "Well, if you stop talking about it, then it'll go away." And and
Your
black
screener's not doing a good
parents,
job.
and they blame black parents. They said, you know, it's the
Mhm.
fault of black parents who are constantly teaching their kids about holding the wheel at 10 and 2, not making a sudden movement, you know, telling the officer, I'm reaching for my wallet, all the things that we have to teach our children so that hopefully they will come out of a traffic stop alive. And I've had people call on the show and say, it's because you keep telling your kids that racism keeps happening. Black parents are trying to keep their kids alive. They're trying to make sure they come home in the evening. And fortunately for many white families, it's not necessary to have that conversation. Other people say, well, it's just manners. We're just teaching, they're just talking about teaching them manners. It's beyond teaching manners. That's not what it's about.
Yeah.
You know, it is truly about trying to make sure that a situation does not escalate at all because you don't know what the reaction is going to be on the other side with the person who's holding the gun. And so you know, it's again trying to understand how different people have to live, even though we all live here together in the same country.
Yeah, I can't think of another of an analogy, but it's like trying to separate seeds from sand. You know, you can't do it without a lot of work. You
Yeah.
can't find a way through it unless you're willing to put in the labor of doing it. So, and I know it's 8:30. I have a feeling that we could keep this conversation going for the next 100 years. Um, but
People's butts are getting sore, Andrew.
yeah. So, as I said at the beginning, and Barbara, did you want to sum up anything? Did you want to?
I just want to say first and foremost, I'm glad that you're here. You know, I appreciate you taking the time because you could be doing anything else this evening that you want to, but clearly this was important enough for you to come and participate. And so I thank you for that. Those of you who I know personally, I really thank you for tuning in and supporting me in that way. I want everybody to become anti-racist, not colorblind, not color brave, not all of that other stuff. I want us to get to a place where we can learn to accept each other as a human being, as people, regardless of what our socioeconomic situation is, our racial situation is, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a long journey, but it can start right now because the more we get to know each other and the more we can talk to each other one on one. I mean, you know, I'm going to be having more conversations with Andrew. I already know that. just just because, you know, there's some things I want to pick his brain about, and I'm sure there's some things he'd like to pick my brain about. If we start there, we can make this, we can turn this ship around. It's going to take a while, but we can do it. Pay attention. And when you see something wrong, call it out. Don't be afraid because there's somebody else in the room who sees it too. And maybe they're just too shy. They're just waiting for somebody else to say something. But we've got to take that step if we're ever going to make a change and if we're ever going to come together. So thank you, and thank you.
Yes, and thank you all for coming. If you're interested in more of the programming affiliated with the One Book, One Community and our reading of Stamped, you can go to the library's website, which is wrl.org/onebook. Jason Reynolds is going to be doing a virtual visit on February 22nd at 7 p.m. and we're very much looking forward to that. He was in Newport News not too very long ago, and he's a rock star when it comes to talking to people. He's just fantastic. I would also encourage you, if you know any young people, to bring them along to hear him speak. We're also going to be having our final session on February 25th, which is going to be group discussion presentations from a large number of large number of organizations who are doing work on racial reconciliation and having facilitating these difficult questions. And then finally, William and Mary has something called the Lemon Project, which is named for an enslaved man who was enslaved by the college, a man named Lemon. And they've got a wonderful series that should be very easy to find. Again, that's a resource that's linked from the library's One Book webpage.